Estate agency valuations, the biggest lie in UK estate agency. Today I'm joined by Dan Marsden, property market commentator and all-roo grumpy old man. We're fellow grumpy old men when it comes to that.
Fair.
What do you mean by the biggest lie? What do you mean by that? Talk to me, Dan.
Look, this is not news for anybody that's in the market. It might be actually to a lot of people who are either unaware of the stats or are just drinking the Kool-Aid. But the simple fact of it is, and you know, you and I have discussed this many times. You know, when you've got an industry where the success rate is what, 53% last year,
It's gone up to 54.
so far this year.
Yeah, last rolling 12 months, we're up to
Right.
54.
You know, where you've got something, you know, if you said like surgeon's got a 50% chance of succeeding on an operation, it would be unacceptable. If you've got someone where, you know, people are giving instructions in good faith, and look, all of this starts, of course, with a price. And anybody that is actually can look at me with a straight face and tell me that they don't overvalue to win instructions in a competitive market is a bullshitter. I mean, it is just, there's no two ways about it. We know it's a big thing. We know that what, 62% of whatever, you know, all listings last year were reduced in price. There's your first problem. Agents are sitting on a sofa, they're giving the pitch, they're saying, aren't we wonderful? And they might do that in lots of different ways, but it might be they say, look, this is it, this is what your house is worth. Quelle surprise, 3 weeks down the track when nobody's viewing and nobody's ringing up to say, can I go and look at that house? The agent will ring that client and say, sorry, Mr. Jones, really tough market. We probably need to bring the price down. Now, if they got a house on, let's say it's 450 grand, and they say, look, this is a bit, but I think a 20 grand price reduction, I think we'll get some viewings. What I would be tempted to say to that agent, in fact, it's what my dad said to an agent a few years ago, is that's fine, but how much of that are you chipping in? And the agent went, why? And he said, no, it's okay. But 3 weeks ago, you told me my house was worth 450. You were very confident that 3 weeks ago, my house was worth 450 grand. Now it's not worth 450 grand, literally. And this didn't happen, it didn't have no viewings, but the point is this happened so much where there was no interest. There were no leads coming through Rightmove or other portals. But it's a price thing. All property will sell at the right price. The right price is something we will discuss forevermore. But the point of it is, if you're in an industry where you are overpricing the houses and the flats you're looking at to win the listing, to get someone to sign in for 12 plus weeks, to then row back, it's not okay. And it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if we were all in a market where everybody wrote on that piece of paper what they actually thought the house was worth, and then let the customer choose off their own merits who they want to work with based on that. But that doesn't happen. You are sold on the sofa. You might be that you really like the valuer that's come round, and actually, and there are loads of stories where actually, despite not having the highest valuation, they go with that agent anyway, to be commended. But when we're in a market or in an industry where you can't have a high price, you've got to go high price or low fee. You can't have both. So you're either going to pitch it at 500 grand when it's worth 450 on a good day, or you're going to say, I'll sell your house for 0.75% or a fixed fee up front, whatever it is.
But there's plenty of people that do both.
Correct. But you can't run a business like that. And I think you've got to, you know, put your flag in.
Is it the vendor's fault for being greedy, or is it the estate agent's fault that they have a vested interest in getting the business because they hate the fact that they'll lose it to their competitors?
Both. I 100% think that, you know, vendor expectations are high, and you know, everybody is a property expert. You know, I did a new homes development many years ago next to the Globe Theatre in London, and there was an ice cream van parked out the front when we launched it, and he was telling everybody queuing for that launch that the flats were too expensive. Everyone's a property expert. They're not, of course. What people actually need is to sit on that sofa with an actual expert, somebody who really does understand value in that area. Chris was talking to me this morning that he had an agent value his house on a drive-by, even though Chris has increased his house size by about, well, whatever it was, 100, 200 square feet. Doesn't matter. The agent didn't see that, never went in the house, did a desktop, looked at some prices, and decided that's what it was worth. So vendor expectations, of course, they're relevant, but it's the job of the agent, whatever kind of agent that is. If you're pricing something, it's your job to tell that person what it's actually worth.
It's very easy for you to say that, but if they tell the truth, they'll lose the listing.
I do it every week, Chris. So obviously I'm working in auctions. I say no to as many people as we say yes to. If somebody is absolutely determined that they want that money for that house and we know we can't get it, we will say no. We're doing it, so I know it works.
What advice would you give to an agent who knows they're overvaluing but feels there's no other option?
There's always an option. There's always an option. The unfortunate thing is, where we can have a race to the bottom on fees, we can also have a race to the top on values. And all that will happen is everybody, I mean, look, if you were to make a list today of the general public, everybody has a vote. Every adult in the UK has a vote. And you did one of these polls to say, who do you trust least in terms of professions in this country? Probably right now at the top would be politicians, quite possibly, followed second by estate agents, followed by, I don't know, mortgage brokers or car salesmen. The fact there's no trust is because this is happening and people know it's happening. People have their houses on the market for weeks and weeks and weeks on end with no interest, and then you get the row back. That's where the trust is broken, and you can only blame the market for so long, saying that the market's tough or something's happened or I stubbed my toe coming out the house this morning.
It was fascinating. I won't mention the name of the agent, but this particular agent was bemoaning that this particular other agent who was about to take the house on the market, it was that agent who was about to take the house on the market saying, this house has been on the market for a year with 2 estate agents.
Yeah.
Okay. And one of them took photographs. One of them got the firm to pay for the photographs. And I'm going to be putting it on the market 50 grand less. And the agent was bemoaning, how dare this agent come in and shine a light, my words, not theirs, on this. And he said, but he throwaway line. He said, but in the year that I had it, I had no viewings.
Yeah. And on the flip, on the flip side, there is also a very large agent out there, and I'm definitely not going to name them. Their company, not mantra, there was a mandate issued: get it on, get it down, get it sold. That is the problem. Get it on, get it down, get it sold.
Well, I mean, if you look in London, out of the biggest 5 estate agents in London, 2 of them have an exchange to listings ratio in the mid-20s.
That's horrific.
Okay. One of them is a posh agent, so posh houses do have a lower percentage.
Yes.
But the other 2, one is a very large franchise, and one of them is a decent old school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And their exchange ratios are in the early to mid-50s.
Yeah. And it's horrendous. And look, maybe this is a different topic, but I think if you were to talk about price reductions, I think what you should do, and this is definitely not going to fall, nobody will like this, but Chris, there is very good data out there from your friends, my friends, that shows number of listings, price reductions, conversion of pipeline. Now, if you were to stick that very public data in the window of every estate agent in the land, we all start at 0 in 2025. And it's updated daily, and it pops up on a screen in the window, and it shows you in my postcode, say in CT, these are your agents, and that is that data. And let people choose on that data. So the guy that's taken on 20 houses but only selling 5, or he's overpricing most of them, if the public were to see that, and that was open source data and everybody had access to that when making their buying decisions, which agent do I use? You have a very different conversation. Yes, they're lovely and they're everywhere, this agent, but look, they're only converting 25% of what they're taking on. That would be outrageous if you said that to agents. We're going to start posting this publicly. It is public information. It's not information you're paying for by subscription. This is now public. That buying decision would be very different from Joe Public if they were to see that. And when I talk about that data, and I talk about conversion of pipeline to probate lawyers, to charities, when they are autopilot putting their properties on with agents, right, probate lawyer, right, charity, your biggest things, the lawyers can get sued on this, but your biggest thing is to maximize asset value. And charities, you've got to do that too, but you've got to make sure there's absolute certainty. If I tell you that these were the averages last year in terms of time it took, in terms of the price reductions, and in terms of success, would you be surprised? And all of them are absolutely horrified. What, really? It's a flip of a coin whether or not you sell that house, basically. And this is not a promo, but if you do it another route, your success rate's much higher. The point of it is, if that data on conversion, on price reductions was absolutely public, A, you'd have a very even race with agents because people are they're now able to make an informed choice. At the moment, it's not really an informed choice. Who do I like best? But if the facts are there, if the data's there, it's a very different conversation.
Because there's a huge difference between how someone feels, which is very qualitative.
Yes.
No, it's subjective, sorry, whilst you can't argue with the data.
I think if the data's good, and the data we're talking about is exceptional, so if the data is good, and you have to question data, but if it's good and it's from a great source, it's undeniable.
Well, I'm happy to declare it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a massive fan of the Insights platform from 20EA. They don't pay me to do it, although I'm their biggest fan. Although I think you're a big fan of it.
It's amazing. It's amazing, and I think if that was out in the public domain and people, if that was out in, let's say, the Canterbury postcode, and I know you've done one of your stat shows on Canterbury.
Yeah. So if you ever want, each week I do a stat show. We focus on a town or a city, and we spend 20 or 30 minutes.
It was horrendous.
They have some.
Canterbury was horrendous, and that's that's on my doorstep. And so when I'm talking to lawyers in my local, I meet them at networking events, we talk about this. I say, well, Chris, I know this guy, Chris, who does the stat show, and we talked about Canterbury. It was horrendous reading, and there were volume agents there. And if somebody says to me, well, who's the best agent in Canterbury? I said, well, I'm not using 20EA at the moment, unfortunately. I will be again, but I know what it looks like, and I can ask people. But it doesn't make great reading. You've got volume agents who are very well known in that area. He might take on tons of properties. You might say, well, we sold this many houses this year. Great. How many did you list? It's a very different question. So they don't tell you that because obviously they want to tell you not how many they took on. And that's what it is. If they all had to put a board outside their office that says we're 53%, that doesn't make great reading. If you just say we are the biggest agent, that's a very different conversation to say we are the best agent.
Put your comments in the reply section if you think we're talking a lot of rubbish or you agree with us. Thanks for your time today, Dan.
Absolutely well.